The Star Wars sequel trilogy is finally concluded, and with it brings a grand new finale to the larger Star Wars story. Now that there has been time for the dust to settle and for general opinions of these new movies to be known, I think it's worth looking at how this new trilogy changes the overarching story of the saga, and examining how Lucasfilm can use this to craft their vision of the Star Wars universe going forward. With the conclusion of the prequels in 2005, we were given a better understanding of how the world of the original trilogy came to be. We witnessed the decline of the Jedi, the fall of Anakin Skywalker, and the culmination of the Sith Master Plan. To summarize, with these additions we were given better context for the originals, and thus the story of Star Wars changed. Similarly, the sequel trilogy expands the story but in a different way, and we will get into how as we go. First, we start with the world given to us in The Force Awakens. It has been 30 years since the conclusion of Return of the Jedi, and despite the hopeful tone at the end of that movie, we find the galaxy far, far away in more turmoil as the people in this time have not forgotten the past. The Empire's splinter group, the First Order, operates in the shadows as the New Republic doesn't seem to consider them a threat. The cast from the previous trilogy have fallen out with each other and are on their separate paths once again. Han has fallen into his old habits, Luke has chosen to seclude himself after his failures, and Leia is continuing to fight the remaining Empire splinter groups. These mostly reflect their lives when we last saw them, which tells us the peace found at the end of Return of the Jedi was poisoned in some way. The New Republic, as shown, does not appear to consider the First Order a threat, and so the Resistance fights on their behalf but not with their support, and it seems they have even less resources than the Rebellion before them. Their technology and weapons appear to be similar, if not the same, as the Rebellion's. The First Order, on the other hand, has developed better armor, weapons, expanded on the Empire's technology, and seemingly has endless manpower, while the Resistance, by comparison, is reduced to a single classroom of men by the end of The Last Jedi. This is the most one-sided confrontation we've ever seen in the franchise. Most conflicts in the galaxy, such as the Clone Wars and the Galactic Civil War, were multi-year conflicts that had multiple important battles that were shown on and off screen. The structure of the sequels paints a different picture for the people of its era. The events of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi happen over the course of about a week or two. In that time, Starkiller Base was fired and destroyed the New Republic's planets of government, Starkiller Base was blown up, the largest capital ship in the First Order's army was destroyed along with several of their other ships, their leader was assassinated, and Captain Phasma was killed. The Battle of Crait nearly wiped out the Resistance, Han Solo dies, and Luke Skywalker dies. Then there's a year skip between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, and in that time, the First Order has been ruling the galaxy. So from the average citizen's perspective, an extremist group that no one took seriously for years suddenly destroys the government and supplants it, while simultaneously sustaining heavy losses and asserting even more brutal control than the empire that preceded it. The reason I gather this is because in The Last Jedi, people are too scared to stand up against the First Order, since they just made a show of might, but only a year after their rule, a group of random citizens large enough to overwhelm an army shows up in the end. The Empire ruled for around 20 years before the Rebellion finally gained enough traction to gain more supporters. The First Order must have been brutal to elicit this response from people in such a short time. This can make sense though, since the thing that made the galaxy so terrified of them, Starkiller Base, had been destroyed, so many of their resources had been drastically depleted. So I see them being desperate to maintain control and lashing out at people far more often and with more force than the Empire, which had a pretty comfortable hold on its territories. Finally, we discover that the one who has orchestrated this last attempt to seize control was Palpatine. He raised both the First Order and the Final Order from the shadows, keeping the Sith alive with his followers, and guided his granddaughter to transfer himself into her and regain his full power once again. Naturally, he fails in the end. His granddaughter, Rey, rejects him with the help of Ben Solo. The Knights of Ren are slaughtered. The Sith cult, I assume, is dead, and the advanced technology of the First Order fails as they all shut down. and their grip on the galaxy is released as quickly as it was closed. Ben Solo, Leia Organa, and Palpatine all die in the end, leaving Rey as the only trained Force user. It becomes up to her to choose her legacy and how to use the knowledge she has gathered. The Age of Resistance was an explosive time. It had a slow build, but with an ending so devastating the galaxy may never recover. This trilogy became Palpatine's final stand, a last desperate attempt to reclaim power. Without the same foundations as the Empire, the First and Final Orders had less ground to stand on, and the more they lost, the more they relied purely on hatred and dogma to justify their cause. The people of the galaxy wanted the Empire when it first rose. The First Order was a foreign invader from the unknown regions of the galaxy. Their rule could never last. Of course, the New Republic and the efforts of the original cast ended in failure, but we don't know how deep Palpatine's influence went. He could have been poisoning the newfound peace of the New Republic for years to weaken it just enough to be obliterated. Even his failure to contain his son still managed to have purpose. It's possible he saw the love Luke had for his father despite the monster he was and assumed that Rey would feel similarly. The rushed and sloppy nature of Palpatine's final plan paints the picture of a man with nothing left to lose and blinded by desperation while faced with his mortality on a daily basis. He raised another army, built more super weapons, even tried to manipulate his own flesh and blood while constantly dying. To conclude all of this, the sequels depict an idolization of the past and an old man's greed and ambition that was so intense it caused mass destruction and chaos, leaving only Rey left to carry on the teachings of the Force. In the end, everything went up in ashes. There's nothing left from the past to dominate the galaxy. The dark side made one final, reckless push after it had already lost. In one sense, you could say that Palpatine was defeated as the Sith died with him, but when you look at the chaos that will envelop the galaxy now, with the New Republic's leadership destroyed, and with the future of the Ancient Order of the Jedi and all Force users resting solely on Rey's shoulders, knowing what happened to Luke when he was in a similar position, you can't help but think that maybe Palpatine still had the last laugh after all. Regardless, the galaxy can never be the same again.